Here with reaction to Bishop Schneider's request, the USCCB Spring Meeting and much more is the Papal Posse. Editor-in-Chief of theCatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, joins me on set, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Thank you both for being here. I want to begin with what we just heard from Bishop Schneider. Should Pope Francis rescind these norms, allowing laity to vote in a synod of bishops? Father Jerry, you first. What authority does this have, the synod itself?
Well, the synod ceases to be a synod of bishops once other people are allowed in there as equal voting members. It's logical. You know, if the Senate of the United States had a meeting and then invited 25 citizens to come in and gave them votes, they wouldn't become senators, but they would vitiate the senatorial voting procedure. It's clear as logic. And theologically, he's absolutely right. The shepherds of the church gather in order to advise the Pope, come to a consensus, vote on propositions, and then send those to the Pope. It doesn't involve having other people come in. If you want to have consultation with the laity, that's fine, but do it apart from the actual synod of bishops, which really ceases to exist once this comes into effect.
Bob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was taken by what Bishop Schneider said about this not being, part of the ecclesial structure, because it seems to me that he's absolutely right, that this is more political than it is ecclesial or spiritual, if you want to put it in those terms. Because why do we have these special categories, young people, women, the margin? This is the language of politics. This is not the language of the church. Now, do we want to hear from those people? Sure, we want to hear from them. But should they be involved in this sort of direct consultation that then makes recommendations to the Pope? I don't really see that. And it tells you something that people like Cardinal Grech keep saying, well, this doesn't alter the basic nature that this is a synod of bishops, but then on the other hand, they want to claim that this is some sort of major step forward in terms of consultation. I think it's confused, but I think it's also nakedly political and therefore something to be worried about.
Yeah. We've seen the disastrous results of that German synod. And Father Jerry, earlier this year, the Church of England convened a synod comprised of bishops and clergy and lay people. The results? The synod voted to permit Anglican priests to bless same-sex weddings and civil partnerships, despite the fact that gay and lesbian weddings are prohibited in that church. Oh, and they're also considering banishing references to God as he, him, or father, the things Jesus said. They will consider gender neutral or female or alternatives. Father Jerry, is this where the Catholic Church is headed? Very quickly.
I hope not. I mean, we certainly should not follow that incoherence. In the Anglican Church, which they themselves recognize, they say contradictory things all the time and treat it as a way to satisfy different interest groups. The mission of the Catholic Church from Jesus Christ is to teach the truth. The truth does not change over time. Over time, we get to know it better, and the truth, when it's challenged, needs to be defended. So if the Synod and bishops becomes a political, expression of, the church, of what's happening now, we have a big problem.
Bob, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was struck. I read the statement that the Anglicans put out, and there is a large group of bishops in the developing world, in Africa and Asia, who have just said now that the Archbishop of Canterbury is no longer the primate of all of them, because he is derogated from what the gospel is. And they actually used a very interesting phrase in the document that they sent. They said, we've been asked to walk together with these members of the Anglican Church who want to bless gay unions, and we can't walk together when we have divergent views of what the gospel itself actually says. I mean, this is a phrase that, of course, we have been hearing a lot being used also in terms of the synod.
The synod, yeah.
If you're walking in opposite directions, you're not walking together.
Yeah, well, the walking is an interesting transition. You almost read my mind, Bob. Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville is on the steering committee of the synod. He's the only American represented on the executive committee. He said at the bishops' conference today that they are releasing the working text of the synod next Tuesday. Now, clearly, some of the bishops are worried about this process. Listen to his explanation of the way the synod is proceeding.
If it has felt at times that we were creating a pathway as we walked it, it's because we were. And this is largely due to the fact that some things you just have to start doing in order to learn how it can be done and how it can be done better. It seems to me, this is just my own thought, it seems to me that the Holy Father prefers this manner of proceeding.
Father Jerry, your reaction?
Let's see what that document says next week, but Bishop Flores' meaning is not quite clear. You have to do something before you know what you're doing or know how to do it. Does that mean an innovation against something in the existing doctrine of the faith, that we have to put it forward? I know that's precisely what the German Synod has done. The German Synodal way has been a disaster because it basically repudiates Catholic teaching in a number of areas. And then when you tell people, when you say to them, what you're doing is horrible, they say, no, we're simply ahead of the curve. We're leading the way. So if we're going in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter that we're walking. We're distancing ourselves from Christ and his truth.
Bob, very quickly, it has the whiff of Nancy Pelosi about it. We have to pass the bill to see what's in it. I mean, we have to go down the synodal way to see where we're going.
Yeah, you know, some people have been complaining that our bishops haven't spent more time talking about the Synod during this meeting this week. And they've even called it the most consequential event in the Church since Vatican II. Well, if I read through, and if anybody is looking for some penance to do in the next few days, you can read through the Continental report, the 40 pages, it could have been 5 pages actually, if it had been written better. The 40 pages that was submitted to the Vatican, and even in there, we have bishops saying, well, we don't know what this is, but we're going through the process, and there can be enthusiasm about discovering something that you're not even sure what it is you're discovering. Yeah. So I think they're forced back to language like this because there is no clear goal in mind.
Yeah. I want to change topics for a moment. Pope Francis has sent a letter to the attendees of the Outreach LGBTQ Catholic Ministry Conference being held at Fordham University in New York this weekend. In a letter sent to Father James Martin, the editor of Outreach, he suggests that Father Martin has the style of God, Bob, and he has encouraged him in this culture of encounter. Why the focus, do you think, by Pope Francis on this organization?
Well, it's a little bit frustrating because on the one hand, the Holy Father has talked about the kind of colonization of the world by this gender theory, this gender ideology that exists out there. But I think here there was the Jesuit connection, because I don't know why the Holy Father has taken such a shine to Father Martin. Father Martin is, of course, very deft at not appearing to contradict Catholic teaching, but actually, I think, doing so. And if you look at the list of speakers at this conference, this is mostly going to be devoted not just to outreach in the sense of being welcoming, but in changing doctrine. And the way the Holy Father, for example, praised Sister Janine Gramick not that long ago, who has been one of the founders of New Ways Ministries, which is a very, very radical group that has been condemned multiple times over decades. It just seems to me that the Vatican has this sort of Jesuit pipeline between Rome and New York that maybe accounts for his soft spot toward Father Martin, but that's the only explanation I have.
Father Jerry, the Pope has also met with Father Martin twice in private audiences. Your thoughts about why the embrace of this group? I mean, this has been going on for 3 years now. There was a book, there was a documentary.
Well, it seems that the Pope thinks that Father Martin is promoting the good of the Church by endorsing the homosexual lifestyle. And I think the Pope, if that's what he thinks, he's made a big mistake. If he's ill-informed about what outreach and its conferences are doing, someone should help him with the homework, because it's quite clear. Outreach, the website, and now this movement, it's about changing church teaching. They want to have the acceptability of the homosexual lifestyle. They no longer want homosexual attraction to be treated as something perverse or wrong. They don't believe sodomy is a mortal sin. They certainly endorse gay blessings at so-called same-sex marriages. Father Martin also endorses the existence of categories of human beings that the Church doesn't consider to be categories. Bisexuals, transsexuals, or transgendered, people who are intersex or non-binary. All of this make-believe world, which is basically endorsing sexual liberation, that's really enslavement to sin, Father Martin's all in favor of that. And it's really, really terrible for your average Catholic to hear that Father Martin's getting all the attention. Meanwhile, Courage, which is the organization founded by Father John Harvey and Father Benedict Rochelle, which helps people with homosexual temptation who want to live chaste and good lives, Courage gets no encouragement from the Holy Father. It's very, very disappointing. And as regards the teaching of the Church, it's really a shame when people who attack that teaching, Father Martin has said he wants the catechism changed, people who attack the teaching get favored. People who defend it get ignored. This is what's happening right now.
I want to move on to Saturday. A conference was held, a meeting at the Vatican on Human Fraternity. This was at St. Peter's Square. A declaration on human fraternity was written for the event and issued by the Vatican. The declaration calls on all men and women of goodwill to embrace the appeal for fraternity. And it states, quote, "United with Pope Francis, we want to reaffirm that authentic reconciliation does not flee from conflict, but is achieved in conflict, resolving it through open dialogue and open, honest, and patient negotiation. All this within the context of the human rights framework. Our children, our future, can only thrive in a world of peace, justice, and equality to the benefit of the single human family. Only fraternity can generate humanity." Bob, God is not mentioned once in that document. What do you make of the statement that, quote, "only fraternity can generate humanity"? This thing sounds like it was created by AI, a chatbot or something.
Yes, this is one of the childs of John Lennon's Imagine. Imagine there are no countries, imagine there's no cause for conflict with people, or, that all conflict can somehow be resolved through dialogue. Yeah. This is simply not the experience of the human race throughout history. I think even religious traditions that don't believe in the fall, as we do, which means a radical departure from God and from the order that God intended for creation, and can only be repaired by God, and not just some generic God, but by Jesus Christ himself. So, by entering into this, which, by the way, was ignored by most of the secular media and largely the people even in Rome who were expected to show up, by ignoring that, you're proposing a solution that can never be a solution in Catholic understanding of what's there. Only Christ can reverse that division that exists not only between us and God, but between one another. Yeah. So it's focused on a solution that is a non-solution.
Yeah, it was a weird event, Father. I mean, the World Meeting on Humanity, or Human Fraternity, rather. It was held at St. Peter's Square. It's simulcast on several continents. It featured performances, including a shirtless ballet dancer who was sort of trotting around. There you see him glissading around in front of the St. Peter's. Then a woman got up and sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" on the steps of St. Peter. Father, I guess the village people weren't available. What is going on here? What is the purpose of this thing?
Well, the purpose, I guess, is to celebrate human achievement, but, let's note a couple of things. Singing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," that happened to be the weekend in which gay pride celebrations were going on in Italy, and they've appropriated the rainbow as a symbol of their group and their ideology. The gentleman who did the dancing without a shirt on, according to reports, he's civilly married to a man. This is outrageous. The Vatican should not be a stage for promoting spectacles associated with immorality and associated, with an ideological cause that contradicts Christianity. Self-worship degenerates basically into the endorsement of the immoral behavior of fallen man, and that's where we're going in the world. Christ, as Bob was saying, he's the solution. He's called the Prince of Peace, precisely because when we acknowledge him, then peace returns to our lives.
I want to return to the USCCB meeting this week in Orlando. The bishops are considering and voting on a revision of the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. This covers the relationship between Catholic medical professionals and the patients. Now, reports indicate the revision would update the directives to align with a doctrinal note the bishops issued back in March. It states, Catholic healthcare services must not perform interventions, whether surgical or chemical, that aim to transform the sexual characteristics of a human body into those of the opposite sex or take part in the development of such procedures. Father Jerry, this revised update would essentially prohibit Catholic hospitals from performing transgender surgeries. But meanwhile, it's being reported a Catholic hospital, at least one, St. Francis Memorial Hospital in San Francisco, affiliated with the largest healthcare system in the U.S., Common Spirit Health, has received millions of dollars for a robot that assists with transgender sex change operations. Your thought?
Well, the bishops are right, and that hospital is doing something disgraceful. So-called sex change surgery or chemical invasion of the body cannot do the impossible. A man cannot turn into a woman cannot turn into a man. Doing bodily mutilation and pretending and suppressing natural hormones, this is very unhealthy. This is wrong. Catholics should have nothing to do with it. Part of the glory of the Catholic Church in the United States was the creation of a healthcare system to take care of poor immigrants who didn't have access to good health care. That system should remain faithful to the purpose for which it was founded. So I'm glad the bishops have spoken, but when it's being ignored, well, there's got to be consequences, because otherwise people get the impression, well, the bishops say something, but they really don't mean to enforce it. This better be enforced, and very fast, because this is a big problem in our society.
Bob, there's a lot of tension right now between medical cooperatives and unions and associations which accredit many of these doctors, and these doctors living out their Catholic faith and their deeply held convictions. The bishops are trying to thread the needle. Will they be able to?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I agree with Father entirely that there needs to be an enforcement mechanism here. Otherwise, it's just talk, and we have probably...
Which would look like what?
I don't know. I mean, look, I never get tired of saying we are a binary faith. Male and female, he created them. Father James Martin has raised the question of whether Genesis is right about that, but I'll stick with Genesis and with the tradition of the Church, and not with what he's trying to push or what other people are trying to push right now. But look, we live in a country that believes in religious liberty, that believes in pluralism. We have a right, and mostly our Supreme Court, when these cases get up to the Supreme Court, has sided with the ability of institutions to have definitions of who can work for them and what kind of conscience protections that they have. We're going to probably have to see a lot of development of the law in that regard. But unless the Catholics themselves push it, and push it rather vigorously in public, I don't think anything will happen. And it's got to start with the bishops, because they're the largest institutional body.
I've got to get to this. The USCCB has posted a graphic this week on their website stating, quote, "We call on Catholics to pray the Litany of the Sacred Heart on June 16th, offering this prayer as an act of reparation for the blasphemies against our Lord we see in our culture today." Now, Bob, this graphic comes following the Dodgers' decision to honor a group of anti-Catholic drag queens at their stadium on Friday. A prayerful protest against the Dodgers' decision, led by Bishop Strickland, is going to take place on Friday. But so far, we have not seen many bishops publicly protest the Dodgers. What do you make of this USCCB response? It's a bit vague.
Yeah, look, I can understand why they don't want to, as a body, look like they're encouraging some sort of special penalty against the Dodgers. But I've got to say, my heart is with the people who are going to show up there tomorrow in the midst of that. This is an absolute outrage. We live in a pluralistic society. At this point in our national history, if people are going to be gay in their private lives, there's not a lot we can do about it, because they have a right to do this. And I suppose that means that a private organization like the Dodgers can celebrate pride, although I think they would be wiser to just stay out of the subject entirely. But to pick the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who are directly disrespectful. I mean, you can only call this stuff blasphemy and utter rejection. You want to talk about haters. These people are haters, and it isn't hard to find videos, statements by them that prove this. I think that this is an outrage, and it can only be stopped. I think prayer is great, but you know, there was a famous football coach who once said, prayers work better when the linemen are big. And so I think some physical presence will make a difference.
Yeah, no violence, but a presence is important, and I think a prayerful witness is so important. Father Jerry, I've been commenting on this over the last couple of weeks, and people have made the argument, look, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, they serve their community. They've been serving there for 40 years. And I say, wait a minute, if the Dodgers want to salute a group of nuns who've been serving the community for real in San Francisco, 26 years ago, Mother Teresa's order opened up a home. You know what they do? They care for homeless HIV-infected men who are otherwise thrown in the street. They've been doing that for 26 years. I don't see the Dodgers bringing the Sisters of Charity center stage, the missionaries of charity, and saluting and clapping for them. This is really an outrage toward Catholicism. And your reaction?
Yeah, well, the Dodgers recognized that because after the first protest came up, they withdrew the invitation. But then they caved in when the homosexual groups basically said, if they don't go, we don't go. Well, he should have said, fine, we're not going to include bigotry in Dodger baseball. And, let's face it, anti-Catholic prejudice expressed, by this group and others is now treated as mainstream Americana. By the Dodgers and by many people. And, I can't imagine an anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish group that did spectacles and paraded around in mockery that they would ever have a role to play in any Dodger community interest event. So the Dodgers made a big mistake. The Dodgers were owned by Walter O'Malley, who came from Brooklyn, New York, and he was a Catholic. He was very devoted. The O'Malley family, I'm sure, was very unhappy about all this. God bless Bill Donahue and the Catholic League because they've been leading the way on this. We should never say, well, let people do what they want. We want people to do good things. And when they do horrendous and objectionable things, the good thing we can do is say, stop it. This is wrong.
Well, I think Bob was right. If private corporations want to celebrate a group of people important to their product, have at it. Go at it all you want. But for a baseball team, that was created really from the likes of Tommy Lasorda and Vince Scully, all Catholics, by the way. It kind of smacks against the tradition of the organization, and I dare say of the people who populate the stands. You can advocate whatever you want, and as Bob said, private organizations have that freedom. But the consumer has the freedom to push back and say, that's not why we patronize your game, that's not why we buy your product. And there does seem, Bob, to be a trend of pushback that we've not seen before.
Yeah,
why do you think that's happening?
I actually think there has been a bit of a sea change, and I'm noticing this in sort of moderate liberal publications and broadcasts and whatnot. I think there's a recognition that particularly this trans thing has gone too far, that you've got now parents coming forward and saying, you're mutilating our children, basically. You're proselytizing them in school when we can't read the Bible. Muslims can't proselytize, Jews can't. But somehow the LGBT juggernaut is able to show films and require people to participate in events that are related with pride. There was this incident up in Canada last week where a teacher actually told a Muslim student who wouldn't show up for these events, you don't belong here in Canada. Well, all of a sudden, the 99% of the people throughout history who believed a different thing than this small group of people now believes don't belong in our democracies. And Father is right to say this has become sort of the standard orthodoxy in our public life. We have to push back very hard at this, and I'm starting to see this crack on the trans issues, and we may see even yet other things. We're seeing students certainly standing up and mocking when they're being shown films of, yet another gay pride film.
Well, you see, the polls are also, Father, shifting, and people are very concerned about this. And look, I think Americans, by and large, are fair people. They want people to be free. They want people to do what they wish to do with their lives and their bodies. However, when that begins to impinge upon your child's rights and your child's body, and when it runs up against religious belief, and that's really what we're talking about here, the right for a group to not only defame a religion, but to publicly be honored for doing so. And I think, to pick up on what you said earlier, if this were the, raging drag queen rabbis or the imaginary imams running around in that garb, they shouldn't be tolerated, and they wouldn't be tolerated. The Dodgers wouldn't dare to salute a group like that.
No, it's true. And, you know, let's face it, baseball's a great game. People go to a ball game to be entertained, to have fun. Forcing this stuff down the throats of the paying patrons at ball games and those watching on TV, there's a message here. It's, we want to take over your thought process. We want you to agree that homosexuality is good, that there is such a thing as a transsexual, that mocking women by dressing up as women and calling yourself a drag queen is okay. Guess what, fellas? That's not why I'm going to the ball game. Leave this program out. I'll debate with anybody, but I don't want to do it at Dodger Stadium. This is really sad, but look, it's a cultural juggernaut, as Bob was saying earlier. The way you fight a cultural juggernaut, stand your ground and show that basically immorality and insanity have no role to play in the public life. We're going to refute it with the truth calmly and in charity, which are really, truth and charity are the same thing.
Gentlemen, we will leave it there. You know, Bob, before we started, said maybe we should rebrand ourselves, or at least for this period, as the Posse of the Peripheries, Father. And I think maybe that's what we should do going forward for a few weeks at least. The Posse of the Peripheries. Well, that'll be our Synod banner that will march under that. Gentlemen, thank you for commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray. Visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both.